Good morning, children, and welcome back to the digital classroom of Vikram Juneja. In today's video, I'm going to deal with last of the short stories, An Angel in Disguise. I'm going to divide this story into 4 parts. The first 3 videos will deal with the line-by-line explanation of the story, and the last video will deal with the title justification, the theme, and the character sketch of the various characters in the story. So we are going to go about reading the story and I'll explain it to you line by line. The story goes like this. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit, and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. Now, the setting of the story is in a village where there are lower middle class people living. The focus here is on a very poor family headed by an evil-minded lady, a woman who is given to drinking. She lives in a tumble-down hut with her 3 children, which include a son and 2 daughters. Now, vice over here means evil or immoral habit. It's a blemish fault. Intemperance, of course, is the lack of moderation, excessive indulgence in alcoholic drinks. So, these were the things which led to the untimely death of this mother. She died at the entrance to that particular hut, and she died in a drunken fit. She was drunk at the time when she passed away. And she left her frightened children. As I told you, there are 3 of them, a son and 2 daughters behind. We read further. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. The woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tones, pity took the place of anger and sorrow of denunciation. Now, children, death is something which actually takes away the spring from the life, that is humanity. The humans are, when they are alive, they are in the spring of their life, and death actually is the ultimate truth which takes away that spring. This woman, of course, had been hated. She had been laughed at. She had been made fun of. She had been criticized publicly. She had been denounced, that means criticized publicly. And by every person in the village, by every man, by every woman, by every child in that village. But now when, of course, the news travels very fast in a village, when the news of her death spread from lip to lip, of course, in subdued tones means in low tones, people actually started talking about this lady's death. The anger actually changed into pity. The anger changed into pity, and of course the sorrow took the place of denunciation. Now, when, of course, earlier she was laughed at, people would make fun of her, people would criticize her publicly, and now people were feeling pity, of course, because the ultimate is the death. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble-down hut in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. Some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body, and some with food for half-starving children, 3 in number. Of these, John, the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad able to earn his living with any farmer. Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active girl out of whom something clever might be made. if in good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly deceased. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. Now, when neighbors got to understand that the young woman, this lady, had died, they went quickly into that tumble down hut where, of course, she had secured that place of shelter from all the summer heats and all the winter cold. She had been able to secure her children from that. Uh, this lady was lying dead over there, and the decent burial was to be organized now by the villagers. So some people actually brought the clothes which are to be put on the dead body of the lady, and some people brought food for the half-starving children. There were three of them. And now we talk about these children. The oldest one was a boy of 12 years. His name was John. He was a healthy boy, able to earn living with any farmer. It means he was that healthy that he could work with any farmer. Kate was between 10 and 11, and she was very, very clever. And of course, we could make out that her future, what was in store for her future, she could make a good living again. Something clever could be made out of her if she had fallen into good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopeless because she was bedridden. 2 years before, she had fallen from a window and she had injured her spine. Of course, since then she was bedridden and she was not able to leave her bed except when lifted by somebody. Okay, here the mother would lift her, and then only will she be able to get off the bed. Now, the problem was the children now. Everybody started discussing about the children. We just read further. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. After considering the matter and talking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John and do well by him now that his mother was out of the way, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make a choice of Katy, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. Now, the children were a matter of concern for all the villagers. That was the chief question. That was the most important question. The dead mother would go underground and she would be buried, and she would be beyond the concern of anybody or any villager there. But the children were not to be left to starve there. Children were to be fed. People considered this matter. They discussed it among themselves, and then Jones, the farmer, he talked it out to his wife. And after discussing it with his wife, he decided to take John, the oldest son, and he thought that he'll be able to do well by him. Now that his mother was out of the way because she was dead, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking for a girl, a clever, she realized that something good could be made out of her. She concluded that it would be a charitable thing. It would be the most charitable thing to make the choice of Katy, even though at this point in time she was very young, to be of much use for several years to come. I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis, but as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from a sense of duty. Expect to have trouble with the child, for she's an undisciplined thing, used to basically having her own ways. Now, the lady decided, Mrs. Ellis decided that Katie was of no use at this point in time, but then she still decided that I could do better with her if I take her late in and try and get something out of her. She said that out of sense of duty, I believe it's my duty to accept and to take a child out of these children. And she decided to take, and she even said that this girl is an undisciplined thing right now, who is used to having the things done her way, but then she will still actually take it as her responsibility to take this child with her. But no one said, I will take Maggie. Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. Mothers brought cast-off garments, and removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts, and even knocked at them for entrance. But none opened to take her in, who wanted a bedridden child. No one talked about Maggie. Maggie was of no use to anybody. Of course, John was of some use to the farmer. Katie could be of some use later on to Mrs. Ellis. But no one believed that the crippled Maggie could be of any use to anybody. So there was pity for her, and people actually looked at her wasted body and they felt pity on her. And there were thoughts about it. She was able to hit the hearts of a few people, but she was not able to enter into those hearts. Mothers, their mothers in the village, they brought some cast-off garments, and they changed her rag clothes and they dressed her in clean attire. The sad eyes of this girl, the patient eyes of this girl, touched many hearts, knocked at them, as I told, hit the hearts, but they were not these eyes, these pitying glances were not able to enter the hearts of people. None opened to take her in. Nobody wanted a bedridden child. Take her to the poorhouse, said a rough man, of whom the question what's to be done with Maggie was asked. Nobody is going to be bothered with her. So there's somebody who said that she should be taken to the poorhouse where these orphan children are taken care of. A rough man actually said this when he was asked this question as to what is to be done with Maggie. He said that nobody is going to be bothered with her. The poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and helpless child, answered one. Somebody knew about this thing, that the poorhouse or the house of orphans is a sad place for a sick and helpless child. So, for your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking. So we are not supposed to be bothered. When somebody said that for your child or my child, it means we are actually taking care of our children. It is about Maggie, it's somebody's child, so we are least bothered about it. But for this brat, it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than can be said of her past condition. So somebody said that, okay, for this little brat, this is going to be a very good change. It will be a blessing in disguise. She will be kept clean. She'll be given healthy food. She'll be taken care of by doctors there. At least it will be better than the condition she has lived in the past. So people already had made up their mind that she should be taken to the poorhouse. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. Farmer John's, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air, bid your sister goodbye, and drew the tearful children apart. Scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Now, There was reason in that she should be taken to the poorhouse. Maggie could be taken to the poorhouse, but nobody was at least satisfied, was not able to make up their minds as yet. The day following the day of the burial, there were only a few neighbors who were there at the hut. Okay, the dead cart. There were some people who were bearing and taking that dead cart. Okay, of the unhonored remains, means the dead body of that lady, so that she could be taken to the grave. Only a few people accompanied. Okay, Farmer John's, after the coffin was lifted from there, he placed John in the wagon, in his wagon, and drove away, satisfied that he had done his bit. Okay, Mrs. Ellis also spoke to Katie in a hurried air, and she said, okay, say goodbye to your sister Maggie. And then she also went away, because she did not even let those children actually have a nice hug, and their lips had touched in sobbing farewell, and after that they actually parted ways. Hastily others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look until all had gone. She was alone just beyond the threshold. Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest, "It's a cruel thing to leave her so." Everybody actually left immediately after that. There were some who actually glanced at Maggie. There were some who were refraining from that look also, because they did not want any change in their mind. They had made up their mind that they are going to leave. Just beyond that threshold, that particular entrance of the hut, Mr. Thompson, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, was standing. The wheelwright was standing there, and he paused and he said to the blacksmith's wife, he said, "It will be a cruel thing to leave Maggie there." "Then take her to the poorhouse. She'll have to go there," answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. Now, blacksmith's wife also said in a blunt tone, she said, "Then if you are feeling pity on this girl, you can take her to the poorhouse." And after that, she sprang away from there. She just went out hastily from there. For a little while, the man stood with a puzzled air. He was confused. Thompson was confused. Puzzled air means he was puzzled in his mind. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. For a little while this man stood with a puzzled air, as I told you. Then he turned back and entered the hovel, the hut. Maggie, with some effort, she was able to actually pick herself up, and she was straining her eyes, looking out of the door of that hut, and from where everybody had departed. And there was this vague, very, very vague terror, the fear, which had actually gripped her thin white face. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," she cried out. When she saw Mr. Thompson, she cried out. She caught her suspended breath. "Don't leave me here all alone." She begged for that. She said that, "Do not leave me here." Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. Now, Joe Thompson was rough, looked like a very rough person from outside, but he was very good at heart. He had tender heart at various places. He liked children. He was pleased to have them when they would come to their shop, and he would actually make wagons and sleds over there. He would mend, he would change the wagons there. They were mended for the village lads, okay, and without a draft on their hoarded expenses, means he would not even charge them. Means if the village guys, the boys, would actually collect some amount also, he would not charge them. He loved them, so he would give them free of cost. "No, dear," he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. "You shan't be left here alone." So he had made up his mind. He said, "No, dear Maggie, you are not going to be left here all alone." And he stooped over the child, down over the child, and he said that, "You're not going to be left alone." Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman in the clean bedclothes which some neighbors had brought, and lifted her in his strong arms, bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. So he said no. He said, I'm going to take you. He actually wrapped this girl with all the gentleness which is required to wrap a crippled child. He did it just like a woman would do, with all the gentleness. He in those clean clothes, bed clothes, which some neighbor of course had brought and left over there, he lifted her in his strong arms, and he bore her out. He took her out into the air across the field, so that he could move from the hovel to his home. So children, this was with regard to the explanation of the first part of this story. We are going to deal with the second part of the story in my next video. Okay, till then, goodbye, take care, have a blessed day.